in the aspect of data factory experience, we saw there are two features within the data factory experience. One is the data pipeline and another is data flow gen 2. Now, in both of those cases, it's majorly moving of data from one location to another, from source to a destination. In case of data flow gen 2, you have the flexibility to do multiple set of data transformation whilst pulling the data from the source and putting into some specific set of destinations. Now, in the demos that we covered across, the source and destination were either with respect to the Fabric offerings or with respect to the Azure offerings that were publicly accessible. When I say publicly accessible, we had connected to Azure SQL database or Azure storage account, which I was even able to access it from my Azure portal from my laptop or my system. Correct. It means those are either publicly accessible or those are accessible for Azure offerings, Microsoft offerings internally. The one aspect that we couldn't cover at that time was with respect to, imagine if your database or your source, to be more specific, is within on premises or is within some network that is not publicly accessible. So in that case, how do we go ahead and try, how do we go ahead with accessing those sources or those destinations or those sinks that are bound within a VNet or a network or on premises via data pipeline or data flow gen 2? So before we deep dive into the aspect of something called as gateway, let's set up our environment to test that out. So now we would go ahead and create a SQL Server database on a virtual machine, meaning we would proceed with creating an infrastructure as a service component wherein I'll have a SQL Server hosted on a VM. Since VM is bound within a virtual network, it means the database that is present within that VM would also be bound within that network. And then we'll take a look on how to access it from Fabric. So for that, first step is go to Azure portal and go type SQL Server. So this would give you a list of SQL servers and the corresponding Windows server that we want to. So we will proceed with creating a SQL Server 2019 on a Windows Server 2022. In that, let's go ahead and create a free version, because for enterprise version, if I have to go and create, it would fail because my subscription that it's not pay as you go subscription. Correct. Hence, the only way that you all can create with the corresponding free subscription aspect is use free SQL Server license 2019 one. Now provide the VM name, virtual machine name. So I'll provide the virtual machine name as Gateway 2022 because the server is 2022 on which we are hosting a SQL Server 2019 version. The region we can create in any region. Availability zone, for us we want to preserve the cost. Availability zone meaning if you want to have it available across multiple regions for better availability of the resource. Since it's a POC, we will proceed with no infrastructure redundancy required. Now security type, I want it to be standard since this is just for a proof of concept. Now the size that is available is, since I already have a server, it is showing me that are needed but only remain for this family because I have already created a server that is present in another aspect. So Let me go ahead and create in another subscription. So under resource groups, let me go ahead and create a resource group. So gateway. So now I'll go ahead and create my corresponding gateway resource group. So now it's in Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, gateway. Within gateway, click on create, meaning within the gateway resource group, click on create, type SQL Server, create a free version, gateway 2022, availability zone, I do not need an infrastructure, security type, I'll keep it basic. Now I can select the size, I'll go with a larger one. For now I'll go with this one. Since it is 61,000 rupees per month, so the hourly rate of this would be somewhat less, meaning somewhat higher, but since we would be using it for a maximum 1 to 2 hours for establishing the proof of concept, so in that case you can manage that much amount of cost from your current Azure subscription, the free Azure subscription. Now I need to provide a username and a password to it. So I'll keep a username, I'll provide a password, confirm password. Now, how do I want, which all port aspect do I want it to be accessible from? So for now, let's not deep dive into the networking aspect. Let's select HTTPS, RDP and HTTP aspect. Next is disks, correct? The disk on which I want to execute this aspect. So let's keep it standard HDD. And let's enable this delete with VM, meaning in case if you delete the VM, also delete the disk associated with it. For now, I'll go with standard SSD. Then next is networking. Now, since this is a virtual machine, this would get created. For this to be present, we need to create a virtual network. So it is asking me to create a new virtual network with this inbound port access that we had provided. I do not want any load balancer, meaning I want only single aspect. I do not want to balance it across. I do not want to enable auto shutdown. I do not want any monitoring aspect. These are the custom aspects that would already be present, which we can ignore for now. Next is SQL Server. Now, within that virtual machine, we need to create a SQL Server. So for that, there are three options with respect to SQL connectivity. So as a part of your own exploration, I'll suggest you all create different aspect like public internet, local inside VM only. For this session, we will focus with respect to private within the virtual network, meaning the SQL database that is hosted on this virtual machine would be accessed from within the virtual network in which the SQL server is hosted. So the virtual machine, and by that the SQL database is hosted. Now I'll enable the SQL authentication, meaning this would provide me a username and a password that is not bound to the Active Directory. Then I can ignore the tags and then review and create. So it has passed all my validations. Now I'll go and create the virtual machine, and with that, the SQL server within that corresponding virtual machine. Now the setting up of that, the creation of that virtual machine and the corresponding SQL server would take some time, and you can check the deployment progress pertaining to, because there a virtual machine needs to be created, disk, virtual network, SQL database instances within that, everything needs to be created, which in turn takes certain amount of time for it to proceed with the creation aspect. So this is basically we are trying to establish the source that we would use, for which you would have the need of leveraging a concept called gateway. Now as the name suggests, gateway, your source or your sink is hosted within a network, whereas your fabric data pipeline is present in cloud. So in order for your fabric data pipeline or data flow gen 2 to create a connectivity between the cloud to that corresponding network, I need to create a bridge, and that bridge or that gate between the source sink that is hosted within a network and the cloud, that is in this case fabric data factory experience. And those who are familiar with Azure Data Factory or Synapse, there is a concept called integration runtime. So one can consider the on-premises data gateway in fabric ecosystem similar to integration runtime, self-hosted integration runtime, wherein they act as a bridge between your Microsoft Cloud offering and your source or sink that is within a network. Now, when I say anything that is within a network, it can be your on-premises system, it can be your databases in IaaS, infrastructure as a service, or even in Azure PaaS. By the time this is getting created, let's understand what it means. So now this is getting created. Let me parallelly open another Azure portal, and here if you see I have a storage account. Now within that storage account, there is something called as security and networking. As of now, this storage account is enabled from all network, meaning I can access the storage account from all the networks from my public internet. If I make this disable, it means I cannot access the underlying data that is within the storage account from any network. So at that time, what I have to do is I have to create something called as private endpoint. Private endpoint is wherein basically you are trying to create a virtual network via which you would be able to access that particular storage account. So within Azure PaaS components also, you can enclose them within specific networking aspect. So the concept of gateway is not specific to on-premises or to infrastructure as a service. It is to any source or sink that is hosted or bound within a network. It can be on-prem, it can be IaaS, it can be PaaS. So now it does take some time to create it. So the gateway would then act as a bridge in case of Fabric Data Factory experience between the source sink that is present within the network to the cloud source. So I can state that. And when I say gateway, connect, what exactly is the on-premises data gateway? It's basically a software that you install in a network. Now, the on premises data gateway facilitates the access to the data in that network and acts as a bridge to provide a quick and secure data transfer between the data that isn't in the cloud and several Microsoft cloud services. Now, these cloud services can include Power BI, Azure Logic App, Power Automate, or Fabric aspect as well. So, by using a gateway, organizations can keep their databases and other data sources on their on-premises or some specific network, yet securely use that data in the cloud services as well. So any queries up till now?
Yeah, Nandan. So, if there is a source in cloud, okay, and we want to uh, like connect data from cloud to cloud, okay. So there we can also use a data gateway, right?
There you can use a data gateway, but is there a need to use a data gateway?
No need,
Data
but
get
we can use, na.
as long as the server on which you are installing that software allows connectivity to that cloud services, and I'll explain once we create that server. This would take some time, correct? Let's get back to this once the server becomes available. So by the time the server becomes available, let's take a look with respect to the other concept of data governance called endorsement. Now we had seen that there was a concept called endorsement at every entity object level, correct? Meaning within the pipeline under the settings, I can see there is something called as endorsement, correct? What does endorsement mean? Any idea? Any guess?
It's a kind of data governance security.
So similar to how we can add tags, correct? One can consider endorsement as the similar aspect, wherein endorsement is basically a way to highlight the best items in your Microsoft Fabric ecosystem, making them easier to find and use by users within the organization. So endorsement ensures that a reliable, high quality data processes and content are easy to find within your Microsoft Fabric. We had seen adding tags, domains. This is another form of data governance aspect. Now within endorsement, there are three types of endorsement that one can leverage. One is the endorsement called promoted. Now, as it states, promoted, basically, this is when users share items that they find useful, valuable, and ready to use. So this in turn helps spread good content within the organization and promote collaborations. So you are trying to promote an item that you find can be valuable for others within your organization. So this highlights an item that is seen as a valuable asset. Now any item owner as well as anyone within the right permissions on the item can promote. And this encourages the collaborative use and spread of the content within an organization. Now what does this mean? Anyone that anyone who is the owner of an item. So in this case, let's take pipeline 1. anyone who is the owner of this item or can edit the item can go ahead and endorse it as promoted, meaning anyone with contributor and above role within the workspace can go ahead and endorse the corresponding item as promoted. So once I click on promoted, at that time you can see that correspondingly a badge gets added in front of the entity or the item as promoted. Now anyone that has right access can go ahead and mark an item as promoted. Then there is something called as certified. Now certified is when a group of reviewers that is chosen by the fabric administrator verify that an item that meets the quality standards of the organization, making it trustworthy and authoritative. So certified means an item can be used across the organization and it has been certified by the organizational leads that have been enabled by the fabric administrator. Now remember, all fabric items such as apps, lakehouse, warehouse, notebooks, etc. Everything except Power BI dashboard can be endorsed by the admin or the folks with right permission. Now items can be promoted, certified, or can be demoted and uncertified. What I mean by that. But before that, let's cover the certified aspect again. So certified or the certification means that the item meets the organization quality standard. Now only authorized reviewers can certify the items. Whenever there is a terminology that only certified reviewers, only specific reviewers that are certified by the fabric administrator can certify, it means there is a concept or there is a feature within the admin portal that needs to be enabled. So there is a property called certificate feature in tenant setting called certification. This is disabled by default. In case if this is disabled by default, then in case if you try to endorse anything under settings, you would see that this is grayed out. For me, this is enabled because at the fabric admin level, I have enabled it. Now, as I stated, that certification can be done by a group of reviewers. So rather than allowing everyone to certify something, correct, we can mention specific set of security groups, meaning thereby specific set of users who only can go and make any item as certified, because to make anything as certified it has to go across an organizational's quality regulations. Not everyone within the organization would be aware of such standards or would follow those. Hence, giving access to everyone to make it certified is not a good process. But since this is my personal uh, tenant, I can proceed with that. So now I crap. Now I can go ahead and for this pipeline make it certified. And this states that this has been certified by this user on this time. So in case if anyone wants to identify who had certified this and for what purpose, it maps it accordingly. And you can see under endorsement that it has now been certified. Now I can even demote an endorsement, meaning under settings, under endorsement, I can go and make it none if I want to revert it, and then it goes away. Now, if you see under endorsement, under settings, under endorsement, there is there are only two as of now. But in the aspect here that I stated, in the screenshot here, I see there is a third one called master data. Now, as the name suggests, master data, being labeled as master data means that the data item, focus on the data item here, is regarded by the organization as being core single source of truth data, and similar to how one has a restriction on reviewers for certified, similar restriction can also be added at the master data level, meaning under admin portal itself, similar to certified, there is a feature called master data that can be enabled for specific set of groups. Now the reason why on pipeline aspect I am only able to see two endorsements is because this is not a data item. Pipeline is an offering for data transformation, etc. It does not actually hold any data, correct? And it does not hold any specific data. Whereas objects like lakehouse, warehouse, or SQL database, Fabric SQL database that actually hold any data, that can be endorsed as master data. And since this is also specific to the set of reviewers, automatic data is captured, and I can see that it has now been tagged as master data. In case if I go to the settings and again I go to endorsement, I can see that it was certified by this user on this day. In case if I want to identify why was this tagged as a master data, and of course I can demote it as well. So this is the concept of endorsement. Any queries?
Yes, Nandan. So when we apply this endorsement, okay, so will it be accessible for all or not?
What do you mean by would it be accessible for all? Would the database be accessible for all? Would this tag be accessible to all? What is your query here?
So when we endorse, okay, apply the endorse. So it's a kind of like security will be applied on the item,
No,
right? No.
no, it's just a tag stating that this whoever has access to this source, correct? Based on that tag can understand that this is a critical aspect within an organization. Unlike other aspects, it's just a tag, similar to tag. There is no security enablement that I'm doing. Security enablement is being done at a workspace level and then at the entity level that we'll eventually see across today. It's just a label that I'm giving it, nothing else.
Okay, okay. Okay, I think relating confidential when we mark confidential, na?
That's sensitivity label, that is different. This is a tag, somewhat similar to a tag, but endorsing. Any queries? Remember this because these are some of the critical understanding for your DP 700 and DP 600 examination. Anyone who has right access on an item can promote it, but only the ones that have been enabled by the Fabric administrator in the admin portal can go ahead and make it as certified and master data. Even though you are an admin within the workspace, as long as you are not added at the admin portal, you cannot make an item certified or master data. That has to be via the Fabric administrator or the users enabled by the Fabric administrator itself. Am I clear?
Yes, Nandan.
Yes.
So now uh, I can see that my corresponding server has been created. So now in case, let me go to the resource group. Now within, okay, this is the virtual machine. Now you all can see that the virtual machine is in start state, meaning it's running as of now. I can pause it once I'm done with the proof of concept. Now, in order for me to connect to this virtual machine, click on connect and connect. It would take you to the connect section. Within that connect session, you need to download something called as an RDP file. So now I'm downloading the RDP, the remote desktop of the corresponding server. So now when I double click it, it would give me an option to connect. So I'll connect it. It would pop up the username, and now I have to provide the password in order for me to access it. So now it is asking me to trust it and proceed with this. So now I am able to log in within this virtual machine that contains my SQL server. Now within this virtual machine, now let me search for SSMS. Now, while setting up the virtual machine, there was an option to set up the SQL server as well. So by default, a SQL instance of the same name as the virtual machine has been created, and that will connect to now in couple of minutes. See, remember the virtual machine that we have created is a very basic one. Hence, it takes time and you need to have a patience to work across this. So any queries team by the time so now in the SSMS, I can see that this is my server name. Within that, I'm connecting it via Windows authentication and I want to trust this server certificate and connect. So within this server, an instance was created called Gateway 2022. Now I need to go ahead and create a database. So I'll create a new database. Let the database name be Data Sharks. So now when I expand this, I'll see that there is a database called Data Sharks. Now let me create a table within it. Create table dbo.test C1 integer. Now insert into dbo.test select one. Now select all from dbo.test. Now this provides me the value. So now I'm able to access this database from within this virtual machine, and by that aspect from within the virtual network that this virtual machine is hosted within, because that was the property that I'd enabled. You all can try in your own time public access and access only within the VM, not within the virtual network. So now we created the virtual machine. Now I need to connect to that database. So to connect to that database, under settings, under manage connections and gateways, I want to create a new connection. Now let me create a connection name called test. I want to connect this, the multiple connection types or multiple sources that I want can connect, correct? For me, I want to connect to a SQL server. Now for SQL server, I do need to provide the server name, the instance name, correct? So for that, the server name is gateway 2022. The database name is data sharks. Now, unfortunately in cloud, there is no concept of Windows authentication. So for now, I'll use basic authentication itself. In basic authentication, this was the username, meaning the username that was not bound to the Active Directory. And then I'll put in the password. So now when I click on create, it is trying to establish a connection from the Fabric cloud to that corresponding database that is hosted within that virtual network. There you would get an error stating that unable to create connection for the following reason. We could not access because there is a gate that is present which is closed. A network related or instance specific error occurred while establishing a connection. Verify that the instance name is correct and the SQL server is configured to access. So this is the problem, that is one cannot access the sources or sinks that are present within a network from the direct cloud connectivity. So for that, there is a concept called gateways, and that's what we'll take a look with respect to that. First, I need to log in. So now I need to log into app.powerbi.com. So now I log in via my account, that is data sharks @yldf7 dot on microsoft.com. Okay, it is app.powerbi.com. So now post logging into this account, you would see that you can download certain aspects. Of course, you can also download it from just googling, just Google out the on-premises data gateway. But there is an option here wherein when you log into app.powerbi.com, under download section, there is an option called data gateway. Now in gateway, there are two modes that you can download. One is personal mode and one is standard mode. In case of personal mode, whatever connections that you create leveraging this gateway, you cannot share it with others. It is for your own personal use case itself. But with standard mode, whatever connections that you create leveraging this gateway can be shared across with others within your organization. So for our scenario, we'll process, and not only our scenario, in general, in most of the cases, we use standard mode itself. So now, as I said, gateway is basically a software that you install on the machine that you need. So now we are downloading the corresponding software. Any queries up till now? So if I go under downloads, the download is still in progress. Now the download has been done. Under downloads, I can see that it's done. Now it would ask me to install this. See, software installation, everything would take some time. Now I can install this within this C drive. So now the installation is happening. Now tell me, imagine that, my question is, imagine that my database and this server is hosted in some another tenant. A tenant is bound to the Active Directory, correct? So imagine if my server is this database server is hosted in some another Active Directory tenant, and my Power BI is in tenant X and my database server is in tenant Y. Can I go ahead and use the concept of gateway to connect to the database in tenant Y from the Power BI or the Fabric in tenant X? Yes or no?
Yes.
Who stated
Yeah.
yes?
Tenant wise, I'm not sure.
Tenant meaning Active Directory in this case, let's consider. So imagine that my server is hosted on server and database is in tenant Y and my Fabric is in tenant X. Would I be able to connect them via a gateway, or do I need to manage some additional infrastructure aspects to create connectivity between these two tenants? The answer to this is ideally irrespective of whatever tenant your database is hosted in, correct? Or your server is hosted in. When you install a gateway, there you have to provide an email address. Now I can provide email address of whichever tenant I want, and then that gateway would be bound to that corresponding email ID ka tenant. Meaning, imagine that if I use an account that is in tenant M, this gateway would be bound to the Fabric in tenant M. But now I can bound it to my current tenant, that is Data Sharks account tenant. So I'll use Data Sharks micros. So in this way, I am stating that this gateway needs to be configured via this account. This account belongs to the default tenant X. Thereby, I am mapping or creating a gateway in tenant X that would indirectly connect to entities within tenant Y. So now I'll sign in. So to the, so now since this is the first time I have set up this server, I have to add this as valid sites, else those are considered as blocked.
You are whitelisting that, right?
Correct. Within this corresponding server itself. So now, okay. Now it would ask me for an MFA. So now it is asking me to register a new gateway to this computer. Now what should be the gateway name? Let me make it as Data Sharks Gateway POC. And I need to provide some recovery characters in case if I want to recover this. But it should be an 8 digit. Now you can see that I am mounting this gateway on this specific region, that is Southeast Asia. I can change the region in which I want to install this mapping to this gateway aspect. Correct. But for now I'll keep it as is. So now I'm configuring the gateway of this name on this server, and that itself would now be mapped to, in case if I go to settings, manage connections and gateways, under on premises data gateway, can you see a gateway got created? Data Sharks Gateway POC is now online and ready to be used. And leveraging this on premises gateway, you can connect to Power Apps Power Automate, Logic App Azure Analysis Service, and Microsoft Fabric. Meaning these Azure components can leverage this gateway to connect to the on-premises or the network related sources. So now my gateway is ready, and that gateway is visible to me here as well in my portal. So now in case if I go ahead and try to establish this connectivity again, but now rather than using cloud, I'll use on-premises gateway. And which cluster do I want? I want to use the, okay, let me refresh this. Now under connections, I want to create a new connections. I'll select the Data Sharks Gateway POC cluster. I would name the connection as Data Sharks Gateway POC connection. Connection type I want as SQL server. Server name would be Gateway 22. Database name was Data Sharks. Now if you see in the authentication dropdown, I'll be able to see Windows authentication as well. But in this case, I'll use basic authentication and then proceed with the basic username and password. Now I'll click on create connection. Can you see that a connection got created? Because now via gateway, I'm able to connect to that corresponding database. So now in case if I want to go ahead and create a pipeline, and I want to connect to that on-premises or a database within the corresponding network source. So let's say I use in the activities, I use a lookup activity. Within the lookup activity, I want to connect to that connection, correct? So I already have Data Sharks Gateway POC connection. Now this is connection type of SQL Server. This is the database name that I want to query. Select all from dbo dot, I guess test was the table name, correct? Now in case if I click on preview data, this might get timeout as well, correct? Because of the VM that we have created is pretty simple VM. It is hosting the database, it is hosting the gateway, etc. So in that case, it might get timed out. But I hope earlier when we were not even able to create the connection, okay, you all can see, correct? Test. I had created only one column in the test table called C1, which had one row. Now I am able to access it. This is the concept of gateways. Similarly, you can use the gateways in the data flow gen 2 as well. Any queries? Now, let me turn off this VM. So it automatically shut down since I turned it off. Else it would choke up my credits within the Azure subscription. So any queries on the concept of gateways? Yes or no?
Yes, Nandan.
No,
Actually,
no.
yes.
Ramesh, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Suppose one more we have like source to connect through data gateway. So one more data gateway need to install on system, or how it will work?
Let's understand the concept behind the gateways. Correct? Give me 1 minute. Let me open the pen as well here. Let me go to some another slide, an empty slide. Okay. So now let's consider that this is my network. This is the organization's network, personal network, correct? Let's consider this as on premises, on-prem, correct? Meaning it is within a network. Within this on-prem, as of now, I have created this virtual machine. And this would also answer your other query that you had, correct? Whether I can use gateway to connect to cloud, correct? I'll answer this. Framework should answer also that. Within this virtual machine, as of now, I am having this database, correct? Now, as of now, what I did is within this virtual machine itself, I installed something called as the gateway, correct? Let me represent the gateway as this symbol. Now, the gateway, ideally, remember one aspect. The gateway should never be installed. The gateway should never be installed on the same server on which your source is present. In this case, the VM in which I had the SQL server, the VM in which I had the SQL Server database, in that itself I installed the gateway or the on-premises data gateway software. Ideally, as a good standard, it is not recommended. But for our proof of concept, we just wanted to test the connectivity aspect because your database is your main system that is visible across everywhere, correct? If within that server, if you're trying to install more software, it would in turn put a pressure on your server itself. Hence, the ideal thing that is recommended is rather than installing the server or the gateway within the same server, this meaning I'm deleting it. Correct? Meaning uninstalling it. Create another server within the same network that has connectivity, cross communication between this. Meaning this VM can communicate to this VM and in turn communicate to this database and install the gateway in this VM. and open the port or connectivity of this VM to the cloud. So in that way, this VM contains the gateway that is able to communicate to the cloud and able to communicate to the source that is present within this VM. Now imagine that if within this on-premises network, there are some other sources as well. As long as this VM is able to communicate to this source, one can leverage this gateway to access this source in the cloud via the gateway route. So in layman terminology, if I have to say, any source or sink that can be accessed via within this VM can be accessed in the cloud via the gateway as well. So if within this VM that is hosting the on-premises gateway, if I'm able to access the Azure SQL database, or if I'm able to access the Azure Blob Storage, then even though they are Azure components, I can leverage the gateway to access that corresponding Azure component via the gateway as well. But when there is a direct communication between cloud to cloud, which would be much more quicker, is there a need for me to go the route of cloud to gateway and gateway to cloud? Even though it is possible, it does not mean we need to leverage it. Correct? When there is a direct communication between these two. Understood?
Yes,
This, I hope, should answer all your queries up pertaining till now.
yes, yes.
Now, coming to the next aspect, that is, as I showed couple of minutes earlier, correct? That is, if my Azure Blob Storage and Azure SQL database are not publicly accessible and within a private endpoint meaning rather than on-prem, it is within a virtual network. So in that case, meaning, let's take an example, correct? I have a virtual network. Within that virtual network, I have a storage account. Now, for me to access the storage account into Fabric, which is in cloud, I need a gateway. Now, one way is what I can do is I can create a virtual machine within this virtual network, install the gateway software here. So do not go via the name of that software called on-premises data gateway. No, it can even be installed on cloud VMs as well. Correct? So now via this aspect, it would go here. But isn't it a tedious aspect that just to connect a object that is present within a virtual network, unfortunately, I'm having to set up a virtual machine, which in turn increases my infrastructure cost and maintenance. And in turn, I have to manage a software as well. So even though I am working on platform as a service, I'm leveraging platform as a service, I am being forced to use infrastructure as a service. So for that aspect, there is something called as VNet data gateway. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So now So in order to avoid that aspect wherein uh, having my infrastructure in PaaS, I am being enforced to use infrastructure as a service, correct? So for that, you might have seen that under manage connections and gateways, there is, we saw on-premises gateway up till now. There is something called as virtual network data gateway, wherein what you can do is you can create a virtual network gateway in the PaaS, meaning in the Azure portal itself. In that way, there is no need to explicitly set up a virtual machine. Within the virtual network itself, I can configure the aspects. So there is something called as VNet data gateway. So you need to leverage the VNet data gateway by creating the virtual aspect. And that basically would be provided for the storage account that is present within the private endpoint. And that is an advanced level of networking concept. Hence, I'll skip that in this session as of now, in the boot camp. But remember that in similar to how on-premises data gateway software can be installed, rather than using the virtual machine, one can use the concept of virtual network itself to bypass those aspects. Any queries? Yes or no?
No, Nandan.
Okay.
Nandan.
So this concludes the concept of gateways in the data factory experience within Microsoft Fabric. Now, of course, with respect to gateway, one can share the gateway, meaning under this, under settings, I can share this gateway. I can make someone else. As of now, this is the aspect, correct? These are the settings of the gateway. I can manage the users who all needs to be admin of this gateway and in turn can use that corresponding gateway. So in this case, I can ensure that I provide takeover user. I can allow him to create connections. I can allow him to create connections with resharing. When I say create connection, he can create connections to data sources leveraging this gateway, but without sharing with others. But here he can share it with others, and this is admin, wherein he can do anything, configuration changes, etc. So this is with respect to the concept of gateways in the Fabric ecosystem. So up till now we covered something called as endorsement and gateways. Any queries?
No, Nandan.
Okay. Now let's understand the concept of accessibility, security within the Fabric ecosystem. So the first aspect that we saw was, let me go to workspace access. Now the first aspect that we saw was in the security aspect is with respect to the workspace level access, correct? Now within workspace, via manage access, I can add users as admin, contributor, viewer or member. Now if I add a user as a viewer within the corresponding admin, he or she would be able to access the database from the portal itself. But granting someone viewer access or other access at the workspace level enables that corresponding user to go and view all the objects that are present within the ecosystem or within the corresponding workspace. Now, if I want to avoid, if I want to avoid someone to have visibility to the entire workspace, but I want to grant him access only on the Lakehouse SQL Analytics or the Fabric Warehouse. Let's take the case of Fabric Warehouse. How to do that? So for that, there is one way. That is, when you click on the ellipsis, here under Manage Permission, you can add a user, and imagine that if I add a user without any of this enabled, okay, let me take an example. Correct. Before that, let me open my SSMS in my local system. So up till now, we have always provisioned access at the workspace level, but workspace is a very upper level permission. When I say upper level permission, meaning viewer permission user would be able to see all the components within the workspace, and I want only access on a Fabric Warehouse to a user. So for that, let me go ahead and get the connection string. So once the SSMS becomes available, then I'll be able to proceed. So I can see that the SSMS is available. Now let me connect to the server type as database engine, SQL Analytics endpoint as this, and rather than, for now, I'll connect it with Data Sharks, which is the admin. It is providing me an authentication pop-up. I need to log in. It might take a couple of minutes since I need to provide the password, MFA, other aspects. So now I have been connected to the databases. Sample DB, which is the Fabric database, Sample Warehouse, because as I said, every SQL Analytics endpoint and the Fabric Warehouse within the same workspace are hosted within the same SQL Analytics endpoint of the server. Correct. Now, imagine if I try to log into that corresponding server via another account called Takeover that I already have, and I try to connect it. Or let me cancel this. Let me provide the database name sample DW, correct? Under connection property, sample DW. Now let me try to connect to that corresponding database via my takeover account. It provides me with a message that could not log in because the authentication failed. Because as of now, the takeover account does not have access at the workspace level, neither does it have access at the Fabric Warehouse level. So under manage permissions, add user, disable everything. Correct. Now add take over. Now this would if I add enable this, it means that corresponding user would get a notification that he has been granted access. So for now I'll ignore it and I'll grant it. So now in case if I try to log in back again, I was able to connect to that database. Since I had granted access on that specific database, that user was able to access that specific database within the SQL Analytics endpoint. He won't be able to access the other databases. Now within the sample data warehouse, let's check whether the user would be able to read the data or not. Select all from information underscore schema dot tables. Invalid object name dot information schema dot tables. Now let me try executing it via my admin account that did had access. Schema. Okay, my fault. It's case sensitivity. We forgot one thing, correct? This is fabric warehouse. It's case sensitive fabric warehouse. Can you see? Here I'm able to see all the tables, but here I'm not able to see any tables. Let me execute a query on one of the table. Select all from dbo.date. This is the admin account and I'll be able to see the corresponding data. Admin meaning the data sharks account, and this is the takeover account which has been granted access. Can you see? As of now, just granting that user, meaning adding a user with everything disabled, what it does, it just allows connectivity access to that database, but it does not give any access on the underlying table data or tables within it. So for that, there are these options like read all data using SQL, read data, read all OneLake data and subscribe to the events, build reports on default semantic model, meaning these are the for the corresponding fabric whereas a default semantic model gets created, correct? I can give that user access on the semantic model for him or her to build the reports. These are some of the audit aspect that one can grant. So via the portal route, one can own fabric permission route, one can only grant read only access on the underlying on the data within the fabric warehouse, but that's at the entirety of the fabric warehouse. You cannot grant read access. See, within this fabric warehouse there are multiple tables that we saw, multiple tables, correct, under information underscore schema dot tables. Within this table so via the fabric portal route, I can grant access to all the tables or none of the tables. There is no intermittent to specific aspect or not. So now let me edit this, wherein I can provide him add read data aspect. So now in case if I go and query this table, let me first remove access, add user, read data, take over, grant. Now let me refresh this cache, close this session and open a new session to avoid any cache. Now in case if I execute select all from the table, I am able to see the corresponding data because I have granted read data access to that corresponding user and I am able to see all the data tables, but I am not able to see sys.query insights. The reason for that is I have granted him only read data. I have not granted him monitor queries, audit queries, etc. permissions. So read data only provides read access on the underlying tables views within the corresponding Fabric warehouse or the Lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoint. So this is how you can grant access rather than granting any user entire workspace viewer access. You can grant entire Fabric warehouse or SQL Analytics endpoint entire read access via this way. Any queries? This is only read only. But imagine if I want to grant someone access to read data on specific set of tables rather than the entire Fabric warehouse. Or I want him or her to be given access to update the data, to delete the data, to insert the data. That is not possible via the Fabric portal route. So for that, one has to explicitly log in via an admin account within the corresponding warehouse and execute certain set of queries. So in this case, now let me remove the access of takeover from here for now. Correct, remove access. Now let me grant the access. Correct. So in case if you want to provide granular object level permissions within the Fabric warehouse, one has to first log in within the Fabric warehouse via an admin account. Then execute the grant command. Grant select access. Grant select is the access on dbo.date to take over at the rate yldf 7.onmicrosoft.com. So what I am basically doing is I am granting a granular access to this user called takeover on this table. So now let me close this. Let me disconnect this. Now let me connect the database again via takeover and in the connection property and see. Now if I try to execute these queries, okay, there is some cache. It takes some time for it to overcome the cache, correct? Let me take another account. So for now, let me within this access workspace under manage access, let me remove the data sharks education account. Let me try connecting to this database first via data sharks education account. So since new account, again I have to go through all authentication and login. So it takes a couple of minutes. Okay. The reason it is happening is because the access, it's because of the cache, correct? That's the problem here, that the cache has been present across, thereby allowing it to connect directly. Unfortunately, in Power BI and Fabric, cache is one of the major aspect. So under manage permissions, now I can see that there is only one user, that is the admin account. Under database engine, let me use the takeover account again. Let's see whether the cache has been removed. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Let me go ahead and create a new account rather than wasting the time in the cache. So uh, under users, let me go ahead and create a new user. Temp deletion. So I created a new account called temp deletion, which is this one. So now let me grant this temp deletion access on this table. Now let me try connecting to this database via temp deletion account. It would ask me to configure MFA, etc. for the first time. Let's see how much time it takes. It is asking me to change the password since I'm logging in it via the first time, correct? So the normal process that occurs whenever you create a new account or login first time via an account. I have to set up MFA. This should revise the concepts with respect to MFA and other aspects. Next, next. Let me scan it via my authenticator app. So now it is asking me for the pop-up. So now cannot log in because the authentication failed. Now let me try to log in again. Because the authentication failed, meaning even though I granted this corresponding account access on the table, it is unable to connect to the database. Now let's understand the reason why. Because I have just granted it access on the select access on the table. I have yet not granted it connect access on the database. What I mean by that is via T-SQL query, I can get the list of database principal, meaning the users that have access and what level of access. So if I execute this query, I can see that takeover and temp deletion, connect, has connect and select access. So now sample DW. Now, if I grant it access via the lakehouse, the fabric warehouse, add user without any aspect, and temp deletion. Now in case if I try to connect to that via the temp deletion account, login failed. MI6. Okay. Let me disconnect all the sessions. Okay. Now we can see that even for data sharks education, it is unable to connect to the corresponding database. So now in case if I grant the data sharks read only access, grant select access. Now in case if I check the aspect here, I can see that grant connect and select has been provided. So now in case if I try to log in via data sharks education account, it cannot log in because the authentication failed. So for that, I have to provide the access at this level, wherein data sharks. Let's wait for a couple of minutes because sometimes the cache takes time for the access to be provisioned. Okay. So now I can see that I am able to connect to this because once you provide that permission, it would then be able to connect to the corresponding database. And now in case if I click on queries, information schema.tables, I'll see that the data sharks education account has access only on the DBO table. And if I execute select all from DBO.table, date table, I'm able to query. But if I try to access any other table like select all from, let's take a look with respect to some of the other tables, dbo.geography, it would get an error stating that does not have access. So this is with respect to granting granular access at the object level within the Fabric warehouse or any SQL Analytics endpoint. Now, this is with respect to object level security, meaning I am able to grant access on the entire dbo.date table. Imagine that I want to grant access on the dbo.geography table, but within dbo.geography table, I want to grant access only on city and state columns and not else. Meaning I want to provide granular access at the column level rather than at the table level. Correct. So in that case, I need to provide grant select on dbo.geography and I need to specify the column names on which I want to grant access to. So let's say I want on city, comma state. Now in case if I do information, I'm able to see two tables under data sharks account. But if I execute this, I'll get an error stating that select permission was denied on these columns. So I have to explicitly write the columns in which I have been given access. So select city from dbo.geography. That would display the list of city, and then I guess we had provided access on state column. In case if I add any other column, it would fail stating that you do not have access on that specific set of columns. So this is with respect to granting granular level permissions at the SQL Analytics endpoint. So any queries up till now? Yes or no?
And then only we
No.
can uh, like this can access can provide through SQL endpoint or uh, lake house in the fabric lake house endpoint. Can
Sorry, didn't get your question.
like is this all access we are providing through SQL endpoint using right?
Okay, let's take a look.
Can
Correct. Up
can,
till now
can
we had understood your question. Hold on. So for lake house, can I grant it on the lake house as well via this query? Correct. So within the lake house, let me first take a look with respect to what all tables are present. Correct. Select all from information underscore schema dot tables. So I do have dbo dot lakehouse file. Select grant select on this to this. I hope this answer your question. So you can
can you
provide granular access on objects via the SQL Analytics endpoint.
and from fabric side there is no option.
That's what from Fabric side also we saw, correct? In the lakehouse, manage permission, it's the same aspect. Read all SQL endpoint, read all Apache Spark. Since this is lakehouse, the aspects are limited here. But the overall concept remains the same with respect to Fabric warehouse. So you can grant access via here or from the database directly.
Yeah, but there is a one lakh security right?
What is,
Fabric
sorry?
1 lakh security.
That's an advanced concept that is wherein they're trying to do as of now. That is not in public securities with respect to. See, I'll come to that security aspect since you have poked that bear as of
Yes,
now.
same thing I think we can do, right? Uh, Granting object label or table label using one lakh
That's
security,
in
right?
still in preview aspect, correct? It's
Yes.
still under aspect. So I won't discuss that. This is what is doable as of today permanently. Clear?
Yeah.
So here, if you provide read all SQL Analytics endpoint, you can grant access. Now, let's make some other understanding here. Within warehouse, within manage permissions, correct? Let me add another account, another user. Let's say I have a user called Nestor W. So let me add Nestor W. Nes Nestor W. Let me give him read all data and let me grant him the access. So that user does have access, correct? So now when I try to execute this query to give me list of all accounts that does have access on the Fabric warehouse, anywhere am I able to see Nestor? No. The reason for that is not because there is a delay in that data becoming available here. This access that we provide is called database specific access. So that corresponding principle becomes enforced and becomes visible under sys.database underscore principle. Now, when we try to grant it access via this route, what we are basically doing is We are using the fabric metric aspect, not the database service principal aspect. Hence, even though we are granting them access to the database, read access to the database via the workspace or the fabric route, that won't be visible since that's a fabric set of permission, not database. And those are not database principals. Database principals are the users that have been created within the database via grant aspect. So imagine that in case if you want to get a list of all users who have access on the fabric warehouse data. So it is cumulation of the users via this query. This query provides you the list of users who have been granted access directly within the database via grant statements. Then users who have been provided access at the offering level and the users who have been provided access at the workspace level. The cumulation of or the union of these three set of users are the one who would have access on the underlying data of the fabric warehouse. Any queries? Yes or no?
The query you run in the database side, that we can run in Fabric, and we can check Fabric side.
Ramesh, your voice is breaking. Do ping the question or
Hello.
else. Now it is clear.
Yeah. So the query you ran in the SQL database, okay, and
Correct?
it shows the list of users, okay. So that query can we run in the Fabric notebook and shows the it can show the like all the list of users in Fabric
Correct. If you
data.
remember in Fabric notebook, there is a T-SQL notebook.
Yes,
Correct?
yes, yes, yeah.
Where you can mount SQL Analytics endpoint. If you are able to query any SQL query via SSMS, the same set of queries can be executed in the notebook. That's what we had
Yes,
discussed, correct?
yes, yes.
Start interrelating all the discussions that we had in the previous sessions.
I forgot actually.
Okay. Any other queries?
No, Nandan.
Okay. Now, the aspects that we saw till now was with respect to the SQL Analytics endpoint. But within Fabric SQL database, since Fabric SQL database is like an Azure SQL database itself, correct? It also has a front end view, but there in case of Fabric SQL database, you cannot, okay, let me take a scenario, correct? Let's take the this is sample DB, correct? Let me execute this query. So here I have this sales LT customer table. Let me try granting access to this table and execute this. This got executed. So be it the SQL Analytics endpoint or the SQL front end point, the concept remains the same of granting access at a granular level. So any queries? So the hierarchy is workspace access. That's the top level access. You can also give access at the offering level, like at the fabric warehouse level. Then you can grant access at an object level, meaning the table. And then you can even grant access at a column level. So granting access at a column level or enabling dynamic data masking or creating a view and granting access on the view enables column level security. Column level security meaning only allow the user to view specific set of columns for the corresponding entity. But then What if I want to, within the table, let's take an example that within my geography table, or let's say I have some another table. Let's me take an example. I have a trip table. Within the trip table, I want a user to only see the trip data of his corresponding country itself, not any other country. So in that case, basically I am enabling row level security to be provided within the corresponding table, meaning in case if he does select star from that trip table, he should only see some amount of rows, not all the rows. That is what is called as row level security. So now we would take a look with respect to the row level security aspect. But before we proceed, any queries up till now on the security aspect that we discussed up till now? If no, then let's proceed to the concept of RLS. So for that, first let me create some sample tables. So let me create a schema called sales because I want to do some sales related aspect. Now within this sales table schema, I want to create a table called sales reporting country mapping, wherein I want the sales representative name, his email ID and the country code for which he needs to have access to. Ah, I forgot one thing. Create schema sales case sensitivity. So now I'll create a table. Now within this, I'll insert some data. Insert into this, wherein the data sharks education account, this account should have access only on CA data, whereas the data sharks admin account should have access to UK, US, CA and India data. So now data has been inserted. Now let me take a look with respect to the table. Select all from. So I have inserted for the admin. Let me insert the records for my another account. So now I can see that within my mapping table, I can I state that this account should have access on this country code and this account should have access only on this country code. Now to access, I need to first create a factual table, correct? So for that, let me create a factual table called sales by country, wherein I'll create a table sales by country and within that add certain records as of date for the corresponding set of countries. Now in case if I query this table, I'll see that there are some additional countries within this table for which even the data sharks account should not have access to, like DE, France, FR, correct? Now, for now, when I'm executing this query via the data sharks account itself, I'm able to see all the data. Imagine that if I want to restrict this as per this mapping table itself, even though this account is the admin within this database, that is where the concept of RLS comes in. So in RLS, you basically have to create a table value function via predicate aspect. Predicate is basically, so this concept of RLS is not new within Fabric Warehouse or Fabric SQL database. This has been enabled by Microsoft since SQL Server 2016 and above. correct? It's the same functionality that we are incorporating within the Fabric warehouse as well. So we first basically create a table valued function with predicate. Predicate is basically a filter where aspect, and then schema bind it with a security policy. So for that, now since I want, since this is security specific, let me create a schema called security. Now within that, let me create a function. So here what I'm doing is I'm creating a function called this, wherein I'm passing the country code as the parameter. This returns a table, but with schema binding. Now what does schema bindings mean? The main benefit of schema binding is to avoid any accidental drop or change of an object that is referenced by another object during execution. So basically schema binding is meant to be used as a predicate function in your RLS policy. So in layman terminology, if I have to state, schema binding guarantees stability of the function schema dependencies and prevents accidental changes that break the security enforcement. Without this schema binding, SQL Server or any Fabric warehouse or anything would not let you attach this function to a security policy that we would create later. Hence, this is a need. This results as a function when I'm selecting one as a function from. I need to join my factual table with my mapping table that I created. Correct? This was the mapping table that we created. Sales rep country mapping. I'm doing an inner join so that only those country codes wherein there is a join for those corresponding rows of the factual data should be visible. But there is a condition that I'm putting where for this mapping table, which is this one, I'm comparing the user email ID for the user that logged in into that session, and for the corresponding set of country codes for which he or she has access to. So I'm creating a function, basically a table valued function. Once I create a table valued function, then I have to create a security policy. So here I'm creating a security policy wherein I am using the predicate, the filter function, and in turn I'm calling this function on this country. So now let me execute the select. First, let me check the username for the corresponding current execution. Data sharks. Now, comma star from the corresponding table, that is sales by country. So now, if you remember in the insert statement that here there are 10 rows, but here I'm able to see only 6 rows because for my corresponding account, that is data sharks, in my mapping table on which I have done inner join and I've filtered on that, I'm only able to see US, CA and UK because he has access only on those particular country codes. For IN, there is no sales value, hence that corresponding sales value is not visible. So this is with respect to enabling RLS. So row level security basically restricts access to rows in a table based on the user's own identity or role, and that's where we used correct user's own identity. So it basically uses a predicate function basically which is an inline table valued function to define which rows a user can access. The security policy binds this function to a to the table as a filter for select or to block any predicate for DML. So this RLS aspect enforces security transparently at the database level rather than having any logic at the application layer. Application layer meaning, imagine if this database is being queried at the application layer somewhere, let's say in Power BI. So rather than having the security at the Power BI level, I am having the security at the database level itself, until unless it's Power BI import mode, wherein it would be again replicated. So any queries on the concept of RLS?
There are so many steps creating hairless from.
Sorry, I didn't get your query. Sorry,
This is not a query, okay?
a
I
comment.
said, yeah.
Uh, Yes, no, I'm yet to come to a point, correct? So up till now, these steps I had to do to enable RLS only on this specific table, because as I said, it binds the security policy binds this table to the corresponding function. So the important point to note here is that security policies and the table valued functions are unique for each table on which RLS is implemented. So in order to create RLS on multiple tables, we need to create functions and security policies for each of the tables separately. So for every table on which you need to create an RLS, a corresponding function and a security policy needs to be created separately. This is the next point. So any queries? Now my question is, even though, even though my admin account, correct? This is my admin account, correct? Meaning this account has admin access at the workspace level. Even if it has admin access on the workspace level, when I'm trying to query the data because of RLS, I am unable to see the overall data. So does it mean that even admins won't be able to identify, check the data, overall data of the table by any way?
Admin can see all the data. No?
No, that's what we saw correct here. अभी ही तो दिखाया. The data sharks account here is the admin of this workspace hosting the Fabric warehouse. This query I'm executing via that account itself, the admin account. Still, I am not able to see the entire data. It contains only 6 rows. The original table contains 10 rows. It is filtering out DE and FR country codes because of RLS. So even the user who is having admin access at the workspace level is unable to see the entirety of the data because RLS being enforced. Now one way is I can update this mapping table for him or her to include all the rows. But imagine that rather than going that route, my question is, with RLS enforced, is there still a way to circumvent the security by any user, be it admin or be it any other user, and be able to see the overall underlying all data? The significance here is underlying. Any thoughts?
I think No, Ranjan, I
Unfortunately,
think no.
unfortunately, it is possible.
Okay,
You
how?
you forgot the term underlying data.
Okay.
If you remember what I had said in our first discussion, how does Microsoft Fabric preserve the data that is present within the Fabric SQL data, Fabric warehouse and the lakehouse
Yes.
in the form of delta parquet file,
Yes, yes,
correct?
yes.
And
Yeah.
we can access the delta parquet files via the storage explorer that we had seen, correct? So the admin can go and access the Fabric warehouse from the lakehouse. Sorry, Fabric warehouse from the storage explorer and download the corresponding Parquet file that are present in the storage explorer. The Parquet file basically contains all your data, underlying data, correct? So in
Yes.
that way, a user can circumvent the warehouse RLS security aspect. So if the user, and that is for admin, but imagine, but remember while showing this aspect, correct? That is manage permission. Under add user, there is also other option called read all one lake data. Or in case of Lakehouse, we saw Spark, correct? So basically, if the user can access the data through Spark or through OneLake, they will be able to see all the tables and all the data. And in that way, if the user browses the OneLake using the Azure Storage Explorer or even something called as OneLake File Explorer, he or she can see all the Parquet files that make up the Delta table and thereby able to see all the data that is present within that table, thereby circumventing the Fabric warehouse or Lakehouse or any aspect of RLS. So even though there are multiple security aspects, remember that it can also be circumvented by certain aspect. Now, why am I stating these aspects to you all? Because data governance is a very critical aspect and you need to be aware that how one can bypass your security for you to design a better security and data governance model. So remember that when you are sharing with a user, there is no need to share one lake until unless you need him or her to be able to access all the data. You can just grant him read access. Read access would enforce RLS. But if he by chance has access to the underlying one lake or the Spark, then it means the user can then access the one lake directly, all the data. Because dynamic data masking, everything is happening at the front end, not at the underlying data. So in that way, downloading the file, I can circumvent all types of securities. So one has to be very careful while granting access at the database level, object level, granular, etc. Any queries? So always start from least privilege access. Start from column and table level access and then went back to whether all data and other aspects. So it is better to grant access via T-SQL queries rather than granting access via front end until unless there is a need for the same. So team, any queries?
Correct, man.
Okay.